Welcome to part 4 of working with the music editor within Studio One 3. And in this last part of our series, we're going to take a look at the parameter automation lane within the music editor. And before we get started, just know that the parameter automation lane is only going to be included in the music editor. So if we were to double click on an audio event within our arrange view, then we can see here that we don't have any automation editing available to us here. So if I F2 and close that out and then press A, we can see this is how we would then access our automation for any audio events that we have available. And we can choose by default the pan or the volume here. And I go into detail on this in my tutorials on working with automation, and there will be a link here if you'd like to find out more about that. So I'll go ahead and press A to come back to our initial view here. Something else to keep in mind that's important is when we are working with part automation, this is automation that is going to be married to our MIDI parts here. So it's going to be contained within this part. So whenever we move this part, it will follow along with it. Now, if I were to go ahead and open up the MIDI that's connected to this instrument channel and then say move our, I'll just turn on this LFO and then turn that. It's now active in our parameter display here. I'll click the A and then add an automation track, close out that MIDI. Now, if I were to play back our part here and add some automation, first I need to activate that. Okay, and I'll go ahead and stop, and then now we've got automation on its own track within the arrange view here, and this is not going to follow along with our MIDI part. So that's something to keep in mind there. If I control comma and come to the options menu here, we can see that we have automation follows events checked. So, but just keep in mind that that's not going to work with our MIDI. If we were to perform this same automation on a separate track with our audio event and we were to move this event, it would then follow. But if we move our MIDI part, it's not going to follow along. So these are just a couple of things to keep in mind before we go ahead and get into working with the editor. And I'll go ahead and select that track and press Shift T to remove it out. And I'm going to go ahead and double click on our MIDI part here to open up the music editor. And then we can see here that we have our MIDI notes, our performance data up at the very top. And then down below we have our parameter automation lane, which defaults to showing our velocity tab. We can actually show or hide our part automation lane by clicking on this first icon here. And we have a second one here. So if we have two different automation envelopes that we'd like to work with in relation to one another, then we can open these both up, adjust their borders by clicking on this here, and then select, say, the pitch bend while we're also working with velocity. I'll go ahead and close out that second one. By default, the parameters that we're going to have available when we're working with the part automation is the velocity, modulation, pitch bend, and aftertouch, and these cannot be removed. So if I right click, you can see that we don't have that option. We can, however, click and add new tabs for automation. Also, by coming to the ellipsis here, we can access the add menu there as well, and we'll take a deeper look at that in just a moment. Let's first take a look at the velocity tab here, and I'm actually going to go ahead and detach the editor and maximize that so we can really get a good look at what's going on here. We can actually edit our velocity with either the arrow tool or the paint tool, and so just by clicking at the top of one of these velocity bars, we can then click, hold, and drag up or down. And if you notice that the display up above will change to reflect the adjustments that we make down below here. And then also the sound will be auditioned, whatever we're using for our device here. And this is useful for, in this instance, on this particular preset, the filter cutoff is going to change depending on what velocity we have this set to. So this is going to give us an idea of where we want to have this set to have the particular timbre that we want to use for the part. This is also good for if we're working with, say, a multi-sampled instrument like a piano. Then of course, depending on what the velocity, we're going to get a different timbre or a different sound for the multi-sampled piano instrument. We can also come above here and then select a group of notes and then adjust the velocities for all at once, and they're just going to move in relation to one another. If I deselect and then hold down Alt, I can then access the transform tool, and then we can also make adjustments here by click, hold, and drag down. We could even come to a corner here and then gradually create a decrease in velocity this way. I'll go ahead and right click and then delete that out. If I were to press 3 and then activate the paint tool, I could actually hold down Alt and then create a gradual increase or decrease in our velocities this way as well. And I'll Control Z to undo that. If we were to select individual notes or groups of notes, we can also come over to the inspector here and then make changes to the velocity here. Right now we're at basically 100 for the velocity. If I put in 50, then we can see that our note just adjusts over here. I'll Control Z, and then we can take a group of notes and then notice that this one is at 82%. So if we were to say change this to the 50%, it's going to adjust this relatively and not actually put this at 50%. We're actually at 32. Also, something to be aware of when working with the velocity, if you're going to be adding notes within the editor here, we have the default velocity setting right now, and that's set to 80%. So if I were to double click and add a note, then we can see that this has been added at 80%. So if we go ahead and change that to another value, say 60%, and then go ahead and add, then we can see that this has been added at 60%. So we've got these default tabs that are going to be available to us when we open up the music editor, but what if we'd like to add an additional parameter that we'd like to automate? We can simply right click on one of the tabs and choose add, or again come back to the ellipsis here, and we have our MIDI selected. So over to the right we have all of the parameters that are available that we can then add. So if I were to come to the filter and say I'd like to add the cutoff, just highlight that. We could double click to add it, or select, just highlight it and then click add. I'll close out, and we can see now that that's been added. I'm going to go ahead and attach this here and select our third-party VST, which is a battery. And I just want to make the point that sometimes for certain third-party VSTs, it may not always show up the parameters that you would like to add. So if I were to click add, and we can see that we just have these various numbers here that we can choose from, and we're not actually seeing the parameters. So if this does happen and you're not seeing the parameters for your third-party VST device, then what we would want to do is open up the battery. I'll click the instrument editor icon there, and then we would come and select the parameter that we'd like to adjust. I'll right click on that and then enable host automation. And then now if we were to right click here and come to add, we can see that the cutoff here has now been added, and we can add that, close, and now we have a tab for working with that cutoff within our battery. Now let's go ahead and record some automation within here so we can go ahead and take a look at how we can edit and all the tools that are available to us. I'm going to F2 and close out the editor, and then come to the MIDI, open that up, and we can see that we have a circle within the center of the filter cutoff dial here, which is from where we added it just a moment ago. I'm going to right click and then connect this to knob 1 on my external controller, and then in this way I can now control this filter cutoff with knob 1 on my keyboard. I'm going to move this out of the way a bit here and press record on our track. Okay, so now we have some automation recorded. I'm just going to pull this in a bit and get our MIDI out of the way and double click. And we can see that we're on our cutoff tab and our information is now available for editing. And so that's one method that you can get to record your parameter automation within the music editor. And I'm actually going to select this just by having the arrow tool active and press delete on my keyboard, because I'd also like to show that we can press 3 and then use the paint tool to actually draw in our own automation if we prefer to work this way. And let me go ahead and detach the editor again, and just know that while we have the paint tool active, we could also hold down Alt and then draw in a direct line. And of course, with all of these tools, when we're working within the editor, they are going to be influenced by our snap to grid if that's turned on, and going to use the quantized value that we have set here. And so as I'm drawing with the paint tool here, you can see how that is snapping. And then after I'm finished, Studio One is going to kind of clean up any of the unnecessary automation points. Now, if I press 3, then we're going to see that we change up here. The paint tool is going to change to the line tool, which we've already seen by pressing Alt with the regular paint tool. We access this. If I press 3 again, we can access the parabola. I'll press 3 again, and then we can enter in. Let me change the quantized value here to quarter. And we get this square wave. I'll change that to half. And just know that wherever you click, if we were to click at the bottom here, we can leave this down at the bottom area. If we were to click in the center and we'd like to have this affect the center area of our parameter, then just remember that wherever you're clicking is going to play an influence on where automation is placed at within the lane. Moving on, we have a sine that we can put in here, and then, or triangle rather, and as we're drawing, if we move up or down, this is going to basically determine the depth of our effect that we're applying or manipulating with this automation data. And pressing 3 again, we have a sawtooth, and then we have a sine. If I press again, we then have the transform tool, and we're actually going to take a look at that in just a second. But for the moment, I'm going to press 3 and come back to, what will we use here? We'll use this sawtooth here, and I'm just going to press 1 and come back to the arrow tool, and I'm going to select one point because I just want to show that we can select a point and then use our right and left arrow keys to navigate to different points that we may want to edit. If I were to hold down Shift and use the right arrow, then I can select a group of points, and then at this point, if I were to hold down Alt, I can then actually nudge these left or right. And of course, these are going to be affected, that nudge is going to be affected by what our quantized value is. So if I were to come in and change this to eighth notes and then hold down Alt and use the left and right arrow keys, we can see that that's moving at that eighth note setting. While the arrow tool is active, we also have a trim tool. So if you notice there's a vertical line that's showing. If I come down, then this goes away, and we can actually kind of bring in a automation curve here with our automation envelope. But as I move above, we then have this trim tool, and I can actually push this down or pull it up and perform some editing with this device here. If I were to come down to the bottom, click, hold, and drag, we can select a range of points and then push these down as a whole group as well. We also have some options available to us. If we were to select a individual automation point here and then right click, we can adjust its value by putting in a value here. We can cut, copy, delete, or duplicate that note. So if I duplicate, it doesn't look like there has been a duplication, but it's just on top of each other. So if I click, hold, and drag, then this is that other one that was created. It kind of got pulled around. But you can also see that we can click, hold, and drag notes or automation points, and these are going to snap to our quantized value. Let me select all of these and then delete those out, because I also want to make the point that besides using the paint tool to draw with, we can actually, I'll press 3, we can actually click. Let me get back to the normal paint tool, and we can click and add automation points in individually as well. And then if I select the arrow tool, we can come in and move these up or down or left or right. If I select a group of notes, then we can move these as a group as well. Now I'm going to select the sine setting within our paint tool, so I'm just going to press 3, and then I'm going to go ahead and draw in some more automation. And actually I grabbed the wrong one, but that's okay. But I do want to change the quantized value. And then let's go ahead and hear back how this sounds on our filter cutoff. Okay, and so I would like to talk about the transform tool, and that's why I went ahead and drew that in. Now if I come to the transform, and then we can just click with these crosshairs and drag, and then you want to select this center. That highlighted center rectangle is what you want to position over your automation points. And then with this we can come in, and if we come to, say, this point in the upper left corner, I can drag that down. I'll come to the upper right corner and pull this up. We could pull this down. Invert it. We could even pull this in. So as you can see, there are lots of options for editing your MIDI automation or parameter automation within the music editor here. And, you know, I would just recommend experimenting and getting to know all of the tools really well. And when you experiment, you can come up with ideas and different sounds within your song that maybe you hadn't thought of before. And of course, now that you've seen how all of these work, if you do have a specific idea, hopefully this video has helped you to have a better understanding of how you can actually implement it in a quicker way within Studio One 3. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up our series on working with the music editor in Studio One 3. Thank you for watching.